Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm so glad y'all were able to come out on this Saturday morning. This is the first of the state discussions, keynotes, here at the Texas Tribune Festival. On behalf of the Texas Tribune, I'm very happy to welcome you to what is the fifth Texas Tribune Festival. This particular discussion is on big cities and big challenges. My name is David Brown, and I'm the host of a program on public radio, which you may or may not have heard. It's called the Texas Standard, and we are now on about 20 some odd stations across the state. If there is a representative from El Paso here, we are not on in El Paso yet. We would love to get on. I'm told that this is a technical issue, though, so that's going to be coming soon. I should mention that this is a 60-minute event, and we will be having questions and answers at the end. And, of course, you can see the microphones there. But as such, it'd be terrific if you could silence your telephones right now if you have not already done so. And of course, if you want to tweet, you can, has Evan already said the business about the Twitter? You can use hashtag TTF. That's how everyone's finding out about what's going on here. Now, I mentioned that this is the state keynote. This is just the first. There's some, have you seen that? There's some terrific events that are going on today. And there's going to be a one-on-one with Joe Strauss here in this room at 11:10. And at 3 o'clock, You're Welcome, America, Texas in 2015. 2050, I should say, not 2015. And there's just some terrific events, and you really should check this out if you haven't already. One other thing that I want to mention before we get started. As part of the Texas Standard, we actually have a suite set up downstairs in a studio. So we would love to get a chance to say hello to you. And if you'll go down to floor M1 and just go to room 104, you can meet some of our producers, and who knows, maybe we'll be doing some interviews down there. Thanks again for attending, and let's get started with our panel. I'm wondering where we should go. If we should begin down at the end. I'll tell you what, let's try this. Let's begin with a woman who was born in Brooklyn to parents who never went to college, grew up in Queens, studied at Yale and at UNC Chapel Hill, and ultimately found a home in San Antonio. And that was where Ivy Taylor became the city's first African-American mayor. Her first elected post, however, was to a spot on city council. And when President Obama tapped Julian Castro to serve as housing secretary, Mayor Taylor was selected by council to serve as mayor. Her opposition to a non-discrimination ordinance drew heat from some of those on the left, but as she famously told critics, and this is a quote, "I will not sacrifice my core values and beliefs for political gain. And if that was the expectation for me as a black woman, you've got the wrong sister in this seat." In a tough race against one of the state's most prominent political players, Taylor was chosen by voters to continue as mayor. That's a victory that more than one pundit has described as representative of a sea change in the politics of the Alamo City. Her successful push for a new source of water for San Antonio has won her bipartisan kudos, and though she is a fan of books, she has been known to relax with InStyle magazine on occasion. She and her husband have a 12-year-old daughter. Please welcome the mayor of San Antonio, Ivy Taylor.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
One of the fun things downstairs when we've been in the green room, it's been a real delight to get to meet some of these individuals personally. And we were talking a bit. I want to get a little serious. Now, something I should point out. This is not a news conference. I mean, one of the reasons you're here is because you want to get a sense of what's really on these people's minds. Now, that's not to say this won't be on the public record. It is. But I really don't want to sling a bunch of questions at our panelists. I will ask all the panelists to respond to this one question, though, first, as we go through the introductions. Mayor Taylor, give me the one biggest challenge you face as mayor right now.
The biggest challenge that I think about in relation to the future of our city is to ensure that we don't grow into two cities based on economics. haves and the have-nots. So, and that's a dialogue that's happening across the nation, this idea of income inequality. But my goal as mayor is to ensure that we can connect all San Antonians to the prosperity that we have in our community. I mean, we've got a thriving economy, a low unemployment rate, but many San Antonians are not reaping the benefits of that. And so trying to figure out what I can do from this position and working in collaboration with many others in the community to provide folks the opportunities to connect to those great things that are happening is, I think, a big challenge.
Okay, put a pin in that, because we'll be revisiting that hopefully. Steve Adler was recently elected the 52nd mayor of Austin, Texas. He is also the first mayor of Austin with a 10-1 council. What this means for those of you who are unfamiliar with this setup, it divides Austin into 10 districts with one council member representing each district. So this is a first for Austin as well. Other firsts, he and his brother were the first in their family to graduate from college. And after finishing his undergrad work at Princeton, came to Austin for law school, and upon his arrival, literally within the first 45 minutes, went down to Barton Springs Pool and dipped his toes in, and decided he had found home. As an attorney, he's frequently represented landowners facing eminent domain issues. He spent much of his early legal career representing women and minorities in employment discrimination cases. He also did time working as general counsel and chief of staff for Senator Elliott Shapley. His legal know-how may be quite useful in a suit he's filed to force the public disclosure of commercial property prices. Perhaps you've read about this. He believes a lot of these commercial properties are undervalued, and if he's successful with this lawsuit, it could very well rewrite the rules across the state. Steve Adler was also instrumental in laying a foundation for the Texas Tribune as a board member, way back in, I guess it was 2009 or so, and he has served many nonprofits, but my guess is that he is proudest of his 3 lovely daughters. Please welcome Austin Mayor Steve Adler.
Thank you.
So hit me, Mayor Adler, with the one biggest challenge you face right now.
You know, a fast-growing city like Austin, we have to focus on the same equity and access issues. And in Austin, I think that centers right now on mobility and transportation. We've never developed that infrastructure, and without that infrastructure, I think we exacerbate and put up considerable roadblocks in reaching the kind of...
no pun intended there, I suppose.
Right,
Yeah.
that we would want to see in the city, for the quality of life we would want to see.
Only 2 women have held office as Houston's mayor. Only 1 person in history has served as council member, controller, and mayor. And I don't believe any other Houston mayor has been named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. We're talking about Anise Parker, of course. She is the 61st mayor of Houston, elected 3 times, and is nationally famous for, among other things, pushing one of the most comprehensive non-discrimination orders in the nation. With the U.S. Conference of Mayors, she chairs the Criminal and Social Justice Committee, serves on President Obama's Climate Change Task Force, and I have it from good sources that she is a first-rate softball player. That true?
Used to be.
As a second-generation Houstonian, she's been immersed in the life and culture of her city, graduating from Rice and spending 20 years in the oil and gas industry. She also ran a retail bookstore for about 10 years, and you know how bookstores can be. They sort of become community centers. Speaking of books, there's a leather-bound journal on her desk that I hear is filled with stories in her own handwriting, stories she could tell about being the first openly gay mayor of a major American city. Any publishers in the audience? Mm-hmm. Parker and her wife have 3 daughters and a son. Please welcome Anise Parker. Did I get that story right about the journal? Is that true?
Yeah. It's called Would This Have Happened to the Last Mayor?
I like that. You are thinking about writing a book, aren't you?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
But the issue of, the number one issue, now there's the issue of which I have some control, and that's infrastructure. And I've spent 6 years pumping money into the built environment of Houston, streets and drainage infrastructure, water, sewer infrastructure. And then, but the biggest challenge we have is one that I have no control over, and that is that we have a $5 billion pension underfunding problem. Mm-hmm. And our pensions are controlled by the state of Texas, and they have failed to act through 3 legislative sessions.
Wow. All right, we'll be revisiting some of these issues as we move
And I'm happy
forward.
to name names if anybody asks. Lieutenant Governor.
Nelda Martinez is not just the first Hispanic woman to be elected mayor of Corpus Christi. Back when she was running for council, she was the first woman and first Hispanic to be the highest vote getter in an at-large election, and she did it over the course of 3 elections. Overseeing the 5th largest port in the nation, Mayor Martinez did something many local political leaders thought was impossible. She secured funding commitments to replace the harbor bridge and help secure the port's commercial future. And despite inheriting a 30-year backlog of street maintenance issues, Martinez put together a coalition of interests to pass a street user fee, despite considerable opposition. This is something of a homecoming for her, as she is a graduate of UT Austin.
Hook 'em, baby.
She is a prominent regional business person, having founded 4 highly successful businesses at last count, and she is currently head of an asset management company in Corpus Christi. And I should say something. Don't call it Corpus. It's Corpus Christi. All right?
Thank you.
Yes. Anytime. Martinez's family has been in Texas since, since before the founding of the Republic in 1836. So to say she has roots here is an understatement, and she has been known to call her hometown the most beautiful city in the Milky Way.
Galaxy.
Galaxy. She's the most recent past president of the Texas Municipal League and currently the 53rd mayor of Corpus Christi. Please welcome Nelda Martinez.
Thank you.
Okay, biggest challenge.
Biggest challenge in one word that's layered is infrastructure, deferred maintenance. And even though we had 4 quadrants to answer that call, and we've addressed 3 of those and still have the last quadrant, which of course is additionally controversial. And so we have a lot more needs and resources. But related to infrastructure, when I talk about what's above the street and what's under the street, also infrastructure related to water and that sustainability source, and we've been very forward-thinking and visionary there, but we still are growing. Frankly, we've had over $40 billion worth of new capital just coming into our region, so we're dealing with that. And more importantly, we have, the affordable housing infrastructure issue that's been a challenge. And the last piece, because of this new global economy that has come into our coastal bend, the human infrastructure element of workforce. And so we're trying to address all those needs regarding our immediate and long-term needs in infrastructure.
Joe Biden, who is known for clarity of phrase, once said that he spent 36 years in the Senate because he didn't want to have a real job. He said, if you're a mayor, that's a real job. Mm-hmm. And I hear some of the comments that you're making right now, and I think to myself, when do you have time, given all of the minutia of dealing with issues such as infrastructure, to think in a sort of a bigger way about what your city is going to look like, given that we're talking about a Texas that is going to be twice its size in terms of population in a very short period of time, by 2050 is what the demographer says. How do you begin to think about the bigger pictures of what your city is going to look like in 10 years, in 20 years, when you're dealing with potholes?
Well, we started dealing with our long-term water supply. We were actually in the World Book of Guinness. I don't know if we're still there, for the longest pipeline that we had, and that was when Bob Bullock, and we started to perfect our water rights. We were the last interbasin transfer in Senate Bill 1. So when you're sitting in this seat, if anyone ever tells you it's a part-time job, it is not. It is a full-time job with a significant amount of overtime, because every time you are making a decision, especially related to sustainability issues and infrastructure, you have to make decisions always thinking 50 years down the road. Otherwise, you're doing a disservice to those who elected you. And as difficult that is, and as unpopular as some of those decisions are, if you don't make them, then you pay for them, like specifically the pension. She's inherited that. But so you really have to think long-term.
But that's the issue. You can think long-term and hope you can imagine what the future is going to bring, and then you have the legislature that you have to deal with. Did any of you see Dan Patrick's keynote last night? It was, I don't know how many of you saw it, but he's saying that one of his priorities in the next legislative session is going to be reducing the, I believe they call it the rollback cap.
Rollback tax.
Right. Right now it's at 8%. Now, what he pointed out was that if revenues currently, under current law, exceed an upward shift of 8%, under current state law, you can petition to have a vote on that. He's now wanting to roll that back to something like 6%, I believe is what he said, which would cause not just a possible petition vote, but an automatic vote on that revenue. Can you do it? Can you live under those terms?
Houston already does. Now, do I think it's a good idea? No. It's horrendous in the ability to get ahead of the growth curve that we have. The legislature has tried to impose this on cities over the last several legislative sessions, and cities have banded together to fight back. But Houston actually has a 4.5% cap, and is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States over the last 10 years. We're constantly playing catch up. And instead of using the ad valorem taxes to pay for our massive infrastructure needs and 30 years of deferred maintenance on streets and drainage and water and sewer, similar to what Mayor Martinez did, I went to the voters and we imposed a new fee. Cities are service organizations, and you don't get elected mayor by saying, I'm going to slash your taxes and your services.
And your service.
You get elected mayor by saying, I'm going to do a better job with the money I have, and this is what I'm going to do. And if the legislature decides to step in and say, you know, I'm going to take another tact, and that is that so many of our conservative legislators believe in local control until they don't believe in local control. We are the ones who have to live with the consequences of the decisions that they make in terms of how much funding we have. The major cities across Texas have banded together for the last few sessions and asked for dollars to go into our roads, major highway connectors. Mayor Martinez has a big port. City of Houston has a huge port. We depend on being able to put trucks on those roads and get them out of Houston. We have begged for the ability to do local option for a BMT tax or a local option gasoline tax, so we can put more money into highways because the state won't do it. And the state says, no, we won't spend money on infrastructure, and we're not going to allow you to have more money too.
Is there any reason to I'm sorry, Mayor Adler, go ahead.
I was going to say that with respect to local control, I think that Austin's a real good example of why a one-size rule for all does not fit. Austin came close to the 8% this year. Had we not done that, we would not have been able to give the across-the-board homestead exemption that we gave in our city. We ended up going close to 8%, but we lowered not only the tax rate in our city, but we lowered absolute taxes on the median home. And we would not have been able to do any of that had we had the 8% cap this year.
But here's the other part of that. I mean, we hear what you're saying there, and we also hear what Dan Patrick says about trying to reduce taxes for hardworking Texans. And at the same time, we read in the Austin American-Statesman that on average, property taxes are going to be going up about $242, I believe is the figure that I've read. Politically speaking, doesn't that inevitably lead to a greater push for property tax reduction?
Well, remember what I said. The city of Austin, which is what is subject to that cap, lowered taxes and lowered tax rates.
City of Houston lowered taxes.
And we could only do that because we had the 8% limit, because it's more complicated than just saying you set a cap. That's why that decision has to be made locally. It was that 8% cap that gave us the bandwidth to be able to give the across-the-board homestead exemption we gave. So most of the taxes that people are paying are related to schools, not with respect to cities. The city taxes in Austin only relate to 20–25% of the tax bill, and that's what this proposal to cap is about. And it will not deliver the kind of property tax relief. It would not have delivered that kind of overall property tax relief that the Lieutenant Governor's talking about, and that's why I understand the purpose, I understand the goal, I just think that when you start trying to set from above, one size rules to fit everyone, they don't always work.
But I have to put this last thing in perspective. Cities, we talk about the Texas miracle. The majority of all revenues and economic prosperity come from Texas cities. And you want to limit that? Those decisions that are unique in every single geographic area of our huge state of Texas. And we are 49th out of 50 states. 49, there's only one other one that receives almost zero funds out of the general revenue from the state of Texas. But we want to put a cap on you and have control because we know exactly what happens and the needs for your city because we sit in your chair every single day. So their state says they want the feds to stay out of their business. Well, and how can you say out of the other side of your mouth that the state wants to get into our business? I said, keep out of our business. We know the needs in our cities, and you don't give us any general revenue out of the state funds, 49 out of 50 states. We have to be very creative of how we deal with what Mary Adler spoke to just earlier, of how we deal with that.
Anyone from Denton in the audience by any chance? This issue was, yes. I want to shift gears for just a moment because Mayor Taylor has been grappling of late with an issue that all major cities are facing, and that's the question about what to do with the disruptive technologies that are behind Uber and Lyft. How did you handle this? Because it's been tough in Houston. It's been tough in cities all across Texas and, for that matter, the nation. How did you deal with it?
Yeah, we were just talking about this a little bit in the green room, and a couple of the mayors up here are still dealing with this. Just this week, we announced that Uber would be returning to San Antonio, but it certainly was a long road for us to get there. We passed 3 ordinances related to transportation network companies, and we finally were able to get to somewhat of a compromise that focuses on consumer choice that allows them to operate. Well, actually, they had been allowed to operate before, but they chose not to. So it certainly it was a tough issue because in the on the news and in the press, they didn't really report on the real details of the negotiations back and forth. What are the things that we're actually talking about, like fingerprint background checks, the changes in insurance industry and requirements and those types of things. All people know is I want my Uber. I want to be able to use that technology.
So what's the solution? What did you decide how did you get to where you wanted to be?
Well, as I stated, it took us a long time to get there. At first, we passed a very rigorous ordinance that mirrored the requirements for our taxi industry, and that was a non-starter. However, in retrospect, I realized that part of that was because of how the public debate was framed early on. I mean, we had a lot of the taxi advocates that came out to all the public meetings, and that was the main perspective that was being shared. Once that didn't work, we tried again and didn't get to the finish line, so we just kept pressing at it. We had to keep having conversations and letting Uber know that we had priorities as a city and that it wasn't just about their business model.
Mayor Adler, does Austin want Uber and Lyft?
Answer to that is yes. This is Austin, Texas. We believe in disruptive technologies here. And it's a new technology. It's providing service. It's increased safety on our streets.
But from the standpoint of a lot of users, it's like, well, then what's the debate? We have it.
Well, but we're facing problems right now. And the fingerprinting is one of the chief issues. We had the Department of Public Safety at our city council meeting this week telling us that if you really want to keep passengers safe, then drivers should undergo a fingerprint background check, and explain the reason why. We're going to spend the next 4 weeks listening to the arguments from our Department of Public Safety, and we're encouraging the Uber representatives to sit down. They have come up with a different kind of background check that they're using in most places around the country. I wish we had the clout that Houston had where we could impose that, but at this point, places where fingerprinting is adopted. Uber has withdrawn, as they did in San Antonio when it was required. But we have those public safety issues, not only with respect to drivers, but also what happens on the street. So there are arguments on both sides. I wish, as mayors, we lived in a world that was black and white, and on some issues, I think that it is. In this one, we're in a gray area right now in our community, trying to find those lines. Our conversation now has just begun in earnest. And we'll see what happens over the next 4 to 6 weeks.
We've had Uber operating legally in Houston for a year. They operated for some months without appropriate local sanction. And we've had full fingerprint background checks. They threatened, we held firm. It is a disruptive technology, and it is the technology of the future. And it's coming. Sure. We might as well recognize it. The problem is that the leadership and management of the company is very much, they're arrogant, they are proponents of unfettered capitalism, and they don't bargain in good faith.
When you say they don't bargain in good faith, what do you mean?
For example, once we started allowing them to legally operate, and the reason that we were able to get fingerprint background checks is we compromised, and we said you can operate under a provisional license for 30 days, because they always say, well, these are part-time drivers, and they don't know if they're going to like it. Why would we want the expense of the full fingerprint background check? We said, fine, let them operate for 30 days, but then bring them on. And we had a really horrific incident in Houston where a rather inebriated woman was raped by an Uber driver. And we looked, and he was not in our system at all. And it turned out that Uber was allowing multiple drivers to operate on their app, and they have the ability to know every driver they have. They were knowingly violating our ordinance.
The Volkswagen syndrome.
Yes. And so I just told them that don't let the door hit them on the way out if they didn't want to follow our rules. And as far as we can tell, with fairly aggressive enforcement, they've been complying since then. But what they like to do is go into a market, sort of overwhelm the market, work with millennials, do the social media, overwhelm we actually had our servers, inboxes crash in the city of Houston. Wow. At first. Wow. We were getting mail from Uber supporters from across the United States. Like, let them come, let them come. Well, let us work through the ordinance and we will let them come. But if you shake hands with them, count your fingers.
By the way, that's a good line. That's a good line. By the way, I was eavesdropping on a conversation here, and I heard a new term, being de Blasio'd, which I gather you are being de Blasio'd right now.
The email and social media campaign has begun in Austin.
Okay. I want to completely shift gears on something else, and there's been a lot of concern about what open carry will mean for Texas. As you
Another gift from the legislature.
It turns out that a lot of these issues really they're right there at that fulcrum between what's happening at the legislative level and what's happening actually in the cities. And this may be one of them. What many people may not completely realize is that actually, as it happens, Texas is one of just a handful of states, maybe 6 states, that does not currently have open carry, will not have until the start of next year. But Texas will be doing things a little bit differently as it is wont to do. It will not allow cities to have an opt-out provision. How concerned are you about open carry in a place like Corpus Christi?
Very concerned. We actually, I didn't support the current legislature that happened regarding open carry. I have strong concerns about the campus. I understand the nuances. But we, a couple of years ago, frankly, we're dealing, I don't know if Councilwoman Riojas, if you were with us at the time, when we had a council member who wanted to, they were so concerned because there was like this school board meeting that happened, I think, in Florida, and a man came into the school board meeting and he was shooting at the school board members, and thank God, nothing happened and it was averted with public safety there. And we had a council member reacted to that and said, we need to allow our council members to bring in their guns to the council meeting so they can defend themselves. And I'm thinking, that's a really bad idea. and our public safety is the one who has given us the best guidance on this, because what happens is that when they're trained of how to deal with someone who is actually has a weapon, firing a weapon, and they understand how to react to that. And I will tell you, council members are not trained like our public safety. If they get out their gun and they start shooting, they don't know who's in that pathway. And so I just have very strong concerns, and I think we should be allowed to opt out.
Is there anyone here who does not have that concern? Raise your hand.
I have a concealed carry permit. I'm an excellent shot, and I have been known to carry my gun. But this is another, there are two problems with this. One is another local control issue. We have a problem right now in the Houston Zoo. The Houston Zoo has signs saying, no guns in the zoo. But the zoo is actually owned by the city of Houston, and the legislature has said to cities that you can't prohibit guns on any public property. And so now we're trying to, actually I may challenge to the Attorney General on this. We believe that, and that our zoo, particularly on school day or days when we have field trips and there's thousands of kids there, ought to be gun-free places. But we are prohibited from doing that, even on an occasional basis, and so we may end up challenging it. But the bigger problem is what it says about our democracy and public places, public meetings, that our society is so lawless that you are not able to be safe in America unless you are armed yourself. I find that very troubling.
Sure. And when she said that I've been known for, I thought she was going to say, I've been known for shooting people. After that Uber thing and your finger check, I mean.
Well, I don't know how hopeful I am that the next legislature, will see a reversal in this respect. So the onus is on us at the local level to try and be creative in thinking about how we can be prepared. It's certainly a bad idea, for more and more people to be walking around with guns, because people seem to have less and less skill in communicating and resolving issues, as has been evidenced over the years with all these road rage incidents. So I think we are going to have to tackle that and figure out how we can get people to resolve their differences, mediate disputes, and work with our law enforcement to know how to handle situations where someone may pull out a gun.
Well, since we're in the realm of law enforcement and do want to be able to take some questions from the audience, let me just mention a few words. Ferguson, Missouri, North Charleston, South Carolina, woman named Sandra Bland. Things have changed in large part because of the advent of smartphones, and that has fundamentally shifted the relationship between the public and law enforcement. I'm wondering, any of your cities adopted body cameras now for police?
Yes.
We just passed it last week.
We've been piloting it, and we should have them begin to deploy by the end of the year.
We've had a small pilot, and we've just, in our last budget, put a real significant investment in to expand that.
And what's the situation?
Same for us. We've had a pilot, and we've put more money in our last budget. We also got a federal grant to augment that.
It's interesting how much the rhetoric, centering around Black Lives Matter has meant to the public at large. How have you addressed Black Lives Matter? Do you embrace that slogan?
Well, certainly I know that many folks, feel, well, we all know that all lives matter. I can understand the sentiment behind the slogan in trying to get us all to think about the common themes behind these incidents that keep occurring in different cities, and thinking about how we can avoid them. We haven't had a huge movement in that respect in San Antonio. We do have some folks that are operating in that space. What we focused on, of course, is accountability with the police through the body cams, better training for the police to ensure that they are handling incidents in the most sensitive manner possible, focusing on community policing, building relationships between the police and the community. But I think we can't just focus in that law enforcement space on this issue, though that certainly is important, and for many of the incidents that has been kind of the common link. But some of the incidents have involved, vigilantes, which takes us back to the previous conversation we had about people walking around with guns. So I think part of it is us not feeling so disconnected from our fellow citizens that we make assumptions about them just based on physical characteristics.
But how do you repair that damaged connection between people, the people you serve, and the police that serve them? How does can a mayor repair that relationship?
Well, the fact that, with this Black Lives Matter, we're talking about it now. It's elevating a conversation, and as mayor, you have to make sure that you're not only being engaged in the conversation, you're trying to address the concerns and put in policy, frankly, to address what's our very valid concerns. And of course, all lives matter. But, and we talk about racial profiling, whether you like it or not, it's out there. And so we make sure that we have those necessary trainings and practices. And, our last police chief, rest his soul, was tremendous, very engaged in the community, African American. We lost him to a tragic motorcycle accident a few months ago. But I will tell you, he was one of the best out there in making sure that he was listening to all walks of life, in making sure not only within a certain segment of a race of a population that we just had equity across the board and how they had practices out in public safety.
It's policy, it's training, it's having a department that actually looks like the city that's policed, and it's having community-oriented policing where there are avenues of communication that exist before the crisis comes.
It's both those things. It's the community-oriented policing. We're real lucky, I think, in Austin in that we have a police force that puts a high premium on that. Heck, if you walk in a parade in Austin, Texas, with the police chief here, people want more selfies with him than any of the politicians that are walking down the
He's
street.
good on Periscope, too.
And he is, and it's accountability, and it's having a public safety and law enforcement force that invites that measure of
Should there be a rule between cities not trying to rip off each other's police?
Yeah, all those in favor?
So,
but it's not just a law enforcement issue either, and
It's community.
I have my wife and I have 4 adopted children, and our son is 39 years old, and he's African American, and he went to visit my mom. My mother lives in Charleston, South Carolina. I actually graduated high school in North Charleston, so I'm very familiar with that area. He went to visit my mom last year, and before he left, I had the conversation with him that I know you have a key to her house. But when you go to her house, you go in the front door, and you stand there, and you ring the doorbell. You don't let yourself in the house. She's an elderly white woman in a southern town. And that's not going to go away until the millennials are in charge and they have grown up in a completely different environment, a completely different experience, and they see race in a fundamentally different way.
we really would like to give folks in the audience a chance to ask questions, and if you want to go ahead and get in front of the mics now, line up in front of the mics now, that's terrific. And while you're doing that, I just want to ask one other quick question of our panel. Have another legislative session coming up, and Lieutenant Governor Patrick has issued sort of marching orders, if you will, to members of the legislature. If you could do the same thing from your perspective as a mayor, what would be your marching orders to the legislature, the next legislature?
Stay out of our business in the city and let us do our job.
I'd add on adequately fund schools across the state of Texas.
Mayor Adler?
You know, I think local control more than anything else. I think it's to really take to heart that the things that are happening at the local level are best handled locally.
Yeah, mine would be the same. Let us handle our local issues and you fix education, because that's the great equalizer.
From the looks of it, we have a lot of people who are ready to ask questions. One thing we would ask is that you refrain from making speeches and that you actually direct your questions as questions. Thanks. Should we go here first, I believe?
Hello, is this on?
Hello.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Laura Blackburn and I live in Houston. And once upon a time, Mayor Parker appointed me to her water task force. And I want to tell you what she first told us. It was, think big. So that's sort of in response to, do they have time to think big? I think so. The other one is a much broader issue, and that is the issue of hurricanes. Two of you live on the coast. The other two of you are frequently impacted by hurricanes that occur on the coast. Certainly San Antonio has been, and Austin as well. Being from Houston, I lived through a number of hurricanes, and part of my responsibility is looking at climate change. If any of you have paid any attention to the Pacific coast, you know that they have been having Category 5 hurricanes time after time after time. That's going to happen in the Atlantic one of these days. And I'd like to know what you think we should do about preparedness for hurricanes. And I'll direct it first to Mayor Parker and then to our Corpus Christi mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Blackburn.
Thank
Why don't you give me a softball? Climate instability is a fact. We don't have to argue about who caused it. Climate change is happening. I serve on the President's Task Force on Climate Change and Resiliency, and I'm also on the International Steering Committee for the C40, which is a coalition of world megacities. Because our federal government and our state governments have failed to act on climate change, we are, as mayors across the globe, working at the subnational level to do things that we believe can reverse or stop climate change. And there are a lot of things we can do. For the first time in history, the majority of the world's population are in cities. And the decisions that cities make can have a direct impact. And so I'm not going to take up a whole lot of time, but the city of Houston has a whole range of initiatives that we have engaged in. We have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by more than 40% since our benchmark year of 2007. We think we can achieve 80% reduction within the next 20 years, and we're moving aggressively toward that. And if you go to the city's website, you can find a lot of information about that. That will have an impact on the strength and severity of hurricanes if we can reduce or reverse.
One other quick question. Are you in favor of the Ike Dike?
I don't have a position on the Ike Dike versus the Centennial Gate. We need to do something. And my preference is what was recommended by the President's Task Force, on which I served, and that is to try to use natural barriers, restore wetlands, green space before you build large man-made barriers. But I have visited the sea gates in Rotterdam and in other places, and I know they work. So it's going to be a matter of whether we want to spend the billions of dollars to make it happen, because we know the state's not going to help us.
Forgive me, because we want to get as many questions as we can, so let's move on to this side of the room if we can, please.
Good morning. My name's Will Mack, and I recently moved to Austin, so I'll direct my question to Mayor Adler, but any of you feel free to respond. Recently, in Austin, of course, property values have soared, and affordable housing is hard to find. I saw my rent renewal notice. My rent is going to increase almost 10% in 1 year. So beyond property tax relief, what more can the city do to encourage affordable housing and make that available for more people?
Affordable housing.
huge issue in Austin, Texas. Housing costs are going up 3 times faster than incomes are rising. And it's moving people out. We're losing people in communities. Since I've come into office, we've lowered the poverty rate in the city, not because we've done anything, but because low-income people are being forced to leave or exporting poverty. There are 2 different ways that you make housing more affordable. You have more housing that costs less, or you give people more money to spend, and we're trying to work in both of those areas. We're revamping the permitting process in our city, which is too long and costs too much, so that we can bring down that kind of housing cost so that we can increase supply. We're taking a look at density provisions that will enable housing to be built and available at lower costs. We're also spending a lot of time and effort on increasing job training in the city, so that we know in Austin, Texas, we're blessed to be able to say that we create more middle-class jobs than any other city in the country, but we have a huge gap between the people who live here that are able to take those jobs and the jobs that are created. So we're bringing in people to take those jobs because we don't have the workforce here. So we're working on those areas as well. There are 40,000 Class C and D apartments in the city of Austin that are affordable, that are on transportation corridors that are going to be lost in the next 10 years to gentrification. That's a $4.5 billion issue or challenge for the city. And right now we're coming up with really creative ways to be able to preserve that housing stock. And in that element, I think we're going to be able to take big steps forward.
We just had a significant bold move a couple of years ago where we totally outsourced our planning department. And we were somewhat antiquated with our built environment and how we plan our built environment. And so with this being done now, and we're getting to a place where we're now going to, it's gone through Planning Commission, it's gone through public hearing, and now we're going to be voting on this new plan, CC 2035. A good portion of that incorporates affordable housing and also strategies there. And so, but currently what we're doing today, we're also making sure that we're having, one idea that we've had with some of our foreclosed properties for taxes, we're having a public-private partnership that we're now going to be doing. We still have to vet it, but we're looking at pilot projects to where we can donate the land on these foreclosed properties to where they can make these more affordable on the back end after they're constructed. And so we're working, again, with the private sector there and the public being the land contribution. And of course, we're working with our affordable housing partnerships, but it all comes down to huge volume. And so you can only have so much foreclosed property that you can have these partnerships with. And so we're trying to, with this Plan 2035, also in the short term, have plans for density and have incentives through TERS that we currently establish downtown to help with affordable housing mix in our downtown area as well. So to make sure you have that mix of socioeconomic backgrounds that are so important.
We're all fast-growing cities, and we all have the same problem.
Let's move to our next question.
Hi, good morning. My name is Neil Falgu. I live here in Austin. I'm a former member of the Houston GLBT Political Caucus and former reporter for the Corpus Christi Caller-Times. So I have plenty of connections to the cities up here. My question is related to non-discrimination ordinances and is for Mayor Martinez and Mayor Parker. Mayor Martinez, of the 4 cities on the panel, yours is the only, I believe, that doesn't have a non-discrimination ordinance. So I'm curious about what you think is the future for that in Corpus Christi. And Mayor Parker, given what the city of Houston is going through right now with its ordinance, what advice would you offer to Mayor Martinez?
Well, my IGR, Intergovernmental Relations Director, Tom Tagliabue, I just went to his wedding last month, who got married to his partner, told me we did have one already in place before the 3 that were so high profile. We had had ours before. So maybe we have to have a conversation about that.
And for Houston, you never want to put civil rights issues on a ballot because they lose. And rights are not something that should be subject to a popular vote. And then the fact that ours is the first thing out of the chute after the Supreme Court ruled on equal marriage. A lot of right-wing national groups have decided that Houston is going to be where they draw the line in the sand.
So you
So
believe
don't,
it's-
so timing is everything.
Do I understand you to say that you believe the ordinance that's going to go down?
Oh, no, absolutely not. But it is an ugly, difficult fight, full of lies and misinformation.
Well, what's
on both
fascinating is
sides.
it's a 36-page document, is my understanding, and for the most part, it doesn't include anything about bathrooms. But I do understand that that's kind of how the debate is being...
I think people are going to show up at the polls and they're going to say, where's Proposition 1? I want to vote against the mayor's sexual pervert protection bill or the mayor's bathroom bill, and they're going to look for something, and it's not there. It's a very straightforward non-discrimination ordinance that covers race, gender, pregnancy, veteran status, and all these other things. But yeah, it's gotten.
These are very good questions, by the way. Next question.
Hi, I'm Luke Metzger. I'm with Environment Texas. 2 days ago, the Austin City Council dramatically expanded its investment in solar power thanks to historically low prices, and thank you, Mayor Adler, for helping make that happen. I'm wondering whether we might expect other exciting news on solar from the other cities, given that it's kind of starting to be a competition, I think, certainly between Austin and San Antonio, and who's going to be the top in the state for solar.
Well, Houston, we buy wind, so we're 40% fueled by wind today. We have a little more cloud cover than these guys. But actually, I'm going to be going to council next week with a significant investment to add to our portfolio of renewables by investing in solar.
Anyone else? Let's go to the next question, please.
Good morning. My name is Frederick Douglas Bailey. I'm a student at Houston-Tillotson University, but I'm originally from Houston. And I have a question about, I'm always concerned about how to get more people involved in like the democratic participation. So what do you all think about as like local politicians, how to get people who don't have the economic leisure to participate in politics to actually participate? To frame that question, I'm only here because I'm a part of the Hatton Sumner Scholar Foundation, and that's a very generous foundation that, allowed me to participate in politics and be here. So how do you think you can get more people who are not economically stable to participate?
I'm trying to figure out why when you say that we don't have the economic leisure to participate in politics, how could you not? We determine the quality of the water you drink. We determine the training of the police officers that pull you over on the side of the road. If you're at a horrible accident, if you're in Houston, it's an ambulance that I direct that's going to come and pick you up. If you have time to watch a TV show at night, you have time to participate in politics and inform yourself on the candidate.
But why is it, though, that turnout is so horrible in local elections? I mean, this is something that obviously has baffled scholars for a long time. But how do you engage people in the way that you're...
People who are desperately unhappy or who are scared will show up. In general, the cities across the state of Texas are well run. They're efficient. They're attracting new population, and people are lots and lots of polling in Houston, I'm assuming from the other cities as well, is that people generally trust local government and are happy with it, and they're not worried about it, which is frustrating because I want them to show up to vote.
I was going to say, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is the better the job you do, the worse civic participation is.
Been the case in the United States.
There are practical things that you can do as well, as far as ensuring that you have meetings at times where people can make them, trying to get out in the community more, so that people can connect with you. I do things as simple as meet constituents at our library branches across the city. So, I mean, you have to think of it from that perspective, but it's not just a problem with the 4 cities up here. I mean, it's kind of a national problem as far as people being engaged in the political scene. I think personally that we need to have more emphasis on civic education, whether that be through our public schools or through community organizations that help emphasize the fact that people have an obligation and a responsibility to be involved. It certainly helps when you have diversity of candidates and representatives. I think it makes people maybe pay attention, people who thought before, well, that's not really for me. When they see someone from their community or someone that looks like them involved and engaged, then they may be more apt to pay attention.
The mayors have been very generous with their time, and this is formally when we need to wrap things up. Would you entertain one more question?
Yes, because that's my council member right there asking the next question, so please allow him.
That's the prime reason she always gets my vote. I'm Joe Cryer from San Antonio. When you opened this panel, you said the hard thing for mayors is not to worry about the problems of 2015 and 2016, is to worry about the problems of 2050. And Mayor Taylor and Mayor Adler won't be surprised for me to say this and ask them about this. In 2050, young people will go to cities expecting to be able to get on an airplane and get out in Seattle or New York City or Chicago. They will also be expecting to get on an airplane and get out in Beijing and Moscow and New Delhi, which is one of the reasons I'm grateful that these two mayors have started a conversation about whether or not we ought to seriously explore a regional airport in this area. Mayor Parker, you know that Houston's airport has connected you to the world for
We have two international
decades, yes. And
Yeah.
as a regular
one.
Southwest flyer, I know about the other one. So could you all say a word about your thoughts, and I applaud you for your early conversations about exploring the idea of a regional airport.
Well, thank you, Councilman, for being here. And I've been excited about the opportunity to work closely with Mayor Adler and folks throughout the region. I think it's real important for us to think of ourselves regionally between San Antonio and Austin. And while we're both continuing on the path of making investments in our respective airports, it certainly would make sense for us to think and talk about the possibility of working together, as we've seen it work real well in some other cities. And we believe that we're the South Texas powerhouse here. We're growing closer to each other, and I think it makes sense for us to think about how we can share resources and build together.
Mayor Taylor, Mayor Adler, Mayor Parker, and Mayor Martinez. Thank you all very much for a very substantive conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.